Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Without further ado, I'm going to bring Gabe Weinberg out. If you could, just stand up on your feet and give him a warm welcome applause. Philly style. Thanks so much, Gabe.
Thanks.
You know, my brother Anthony's in the back, and he always says, like, making people stand up is kind of cheesy, and it is, but, you know, Gabe he lives in Valley Forge, his office in Paoli. You know, we had a major tragedy here at 22nd and Market today, and it wasn't easy necessarily to get into the city. And he's here, and you guys are here, so I really applaud you for making the effort to come out. And I can't thank you enough, Gabe. This is really awesome. But that's what's different about Startup Grind. We should be applauding guys like Gabe Weinberg, other founders that we're going to bring in, because they're taking the time really to shed light on the experiences that they've learned, and hopefully we can take away something from it. So Gabe, really, thanks for all that you do. You do so much. You're a silent leader. You just do your work, you get it done, you're a doer, actively involved in Philadelphia companies, actively involved in mentorship. I just can't thank you enough for being here. So, you know, from the bottom of my heart with Benjamin's Desk and Startup Grind, thanks for all that you do to make Philadelphia great.
Thanks for having me.
By the way, Gabe's blog, ton of advice on there. So there's so much stuff on his blog that it would take like 10 Startup Grind events just to cover all the material and good stuff in there. So, you're a family man. I read online that you took 2 years off when you were in the early stages of DuckDuckGo to stay home with your kid while your wife worked full time.
That is true.
So, you know, tell me about that. That's awesome. I think so many people think about tech startup founders here till 3 in the morning and grinding. And you took 2 years off and you still got a good portion of your startup up and running.
Yeah, well, so I was on my own. I started this company, but I wasn't intended to be a company, so.
Solo founder.
Solo founder, and my wife went to a PhD program somewhat, didn't regret it fully, but spent 9 years in school, so felt she should get a job related to it. So we moved down here, and she's a statistician in GlaxoSmithKline, and you know, she's just getting into the swing of her job, and she's on a drug called pazopanib that was going up for FDA approval, which is complicated and a big deal. And so it was pretty obvious that, and I was interested. So we had a kid, and I was the de facto person to stay home with our son, Eli.
Very cool. Two sons, boy, girl?
Yeah, I have 2 sons now. Eli's 4, and Ryan's 2.
So
2 boys.
What's your typical day look like now?
So you have young kids, right?
I have a 9-month-old.
Right. So since both of us work now and kids demand different things at different young ages a lot, our situation is totally in flux all the time. So what's happening today is different than it was 3 months ago. But at the moment, our oldest is in school 3 days a week. Our youngest goes to kind of daycare 2 days a week, and we have some help at home, and I don't know, it's all in flux. I come home early and spend the morning and the evening with them every day.
What time do you go to bed?
I try to, my kids, so some people have kids who sleep in, and some people have kids who wake up really early. My kids wake up really early, and I'm up with them, so I actually need 8 hours of sleep, so I try to get in bed by 10.
Very cool. So let's start at the beginning. I mean, I want to get into DuckDuckGo. I want to get into some wisdom that you have by way of your exit with NamesDatabase, but let's start at the beginning. Take us back to your MIT days. You know, you're working hard. Did you want to be a tech startup founder? Did you stumble upon it?
No, I had no intention of being a tech startup founder. I was a physics undergrad, and actually came and wanted to do chemistry, and then I got into astronomy, and I was like going at the telescopes and looking at stuff. And then midway through, I saw like the people who were older than me going to grad school, and I just had no interest in it, in like the academic career path. So I really didn't know what I was going to do. I had an uncle, probably talk about mentorship, who I didn't draw on enough for mentorship, but I drew on enough to ask him about startups. He was in startups in Silicon Valley. So the summer after my junior year, I went out to Silicon Valley, and he got me an internship working with him at a venture capital firm, InQtel, and I spent the summer kind of getting a crash course in startups. That's how I got into it. On kind of a whim, I came back and was like, I'm doing this now. I'm gonna drop out of school and do this.
What year were you?
At the end of my junior year. This
Wow.
was 2000. Through a weird turn of events, I ended up having all the credits to graduate right then that I didn't realize. And so I left school, and another lucky thing or related to lucky upbringing is my dad had some money, not full tuition, but some of his tuition from my fourth year. He just gave it to me to do whatever I wanted with, and so I promptly put it into this startup and quickly lost it all. Not super quick. It took a year and a half to lose it, but through those turn of events, I just jumped right into it, and more on a whim than of a plan.
Fail fast and fail cheap, though, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about the startups, if you would, that you launched. Did you learn anything? Did you have success early on? Did you have failure?
Lots of failure. So get back to the mentorship question. I had a mentor who was built into my family right there. I didn't listen to him at all. Beyond being interested in getting into startups, I kind of put him on the board of the company, but it wasn't a real board. We didn't really have board meetings. I didn't pay any attention to him. It was an educational software company designed to increase parental involvement in K-12 education. And I thought that, I still think, it's one of the ideal cases for the internet is to get parents more involved in school education. And for various reasons, it was about 10, 15 years too early of an idea. That's still starting to happen right now.
Right, absolutely.
So it wasn't on its face a bad idea. It was the wrong time, which happens a lot to people.
Yep.
And then beyond that, I just made all sorts of mistakes. I mean, I hired the wrong people. I wasn't able to raise money. I got into a business that involves an intense, long sales cycle that I knew nothing about. I was focused on the product, and we did build an interesting product, and we tested it in some schools, but we couldn't really get it off the ground.
Timing can be everything.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's fast forward a bit. You sold NamesDatabase to classmates.com for $10 million. What'd you learn from that experience?
So similar, a lot of luck involved in all that, but I additionally was not drawing on mentors there, so I didn't learn from the first experience. It took it to the second experience. I've since learned this now, after 10 years, or 15 years, however long I've been doing this. But that was a very weird company, or maybe it's not that weird, because you don't hear a lot about bootstrap companies, but there are a lot in Philadelphia.
Right.
We had no investors.
Talk about NamesDatabase. What was NamesDatabase?
So it was at its core, at its beginning, it was not a product. I was messing around with lots of things I was interested in. I had randomly put up names on the internet, pages of names that were linked nowhere that meant nothing. They were from the census files. I was just messing around on a hunch that Google was kind of taking off. This was 2003. That people were searching names a lot, but there were no results for them. So I figured if you had a bunch of names pages, you get a ton of traffic.
Smart.
So I put these up one day. Back then, it took 6 to 9 months for Google to index pages. So I literally forgot about it. Then one day, my server started getting all this traffic. It was getting 10 to 20,000 unique visitors a day on these names pages. Wow. And there was nothing on them. So at that point, I had a business partner. We were kind of doing some other ideas, and we said, what if we just put a sign-up form on this thing and see what happens? So I did that, and there was nothing after the sign-up form, but people were signing up. And we're like, okay, let's people sign up for this, and came up with a name. At that point, it wasn't even NamesDatabase. It was just on my personal domain, which I don't have anymore. It was names.mal. It was on subdomain of my domain or whatever. And then I got attracted to a very hard problem that also wasn't a product, which was, can you engineer a viral loop? can you turn these people signing up into a truly exponential growth curve? And I'm not exactly sure why I got hooked on that, but I spent the next 9 months on that problem and eventually got it to work. But at the end of that, there was still no product really. People were signing up and coming through and registering, and so the easiest thing to tack onto that, which we eventually did, was something like classmates.com, find your old friends and classmates. You registered on the site. The basic information we had was your name. We could hook you up with old friends and classmates. We started collecting high school information when you signed up. And we sold that as a subscription, basically copied Classmates' business model, and it immediately started throwing off cash. I focused on that viral loop worked, but it didn't work well for very long because it relied on email, and email deliverability rates from 2003 every year kept going down as spam went up and just more people came onto email marketing. So it was a constant battle of keeping it on the cusp of exponential, and we get blacklisted by email. I have to contact them and run through all these filters. And so in retrospect, I spent all my time on that problem, not a lot of time on product. We never hired anyone from beginning to end. I wrote all the code.
You and a co-founder.
Yeah, and he was working on something else pretty much 100% of the time. So
and bootstrapped?
Completely bootstrapped. I wrote all the code. I did all the server stuff. So we were possibly sitting on something a lot bigger than what it was if I had listened or took on any mentorship and tried to think about market opportunities or all these things that you should be thinking about. But I was real excited about what it was, and I have no regrets for it. But
right.
In retrospect, that was the major lesson learned. Is I was so heads down. Didn't take one moment to step back in 3 years. That was from like beginning to end, to even consider what we were really doing.
Wow. So you mentioned a couple things. We talked about bootstrapping. Bootstrapping and fundraising are interesting topics. Like, my wife and I, when we started this, we consider this a startup, even though some might consider it a small business. But we think that this market has a very high growth potential for what the future of office space looks like. And our friends and family were, as a joke, I tell my brothers, like MasterCard and Visa and Amex, and like, we didn't have a rich uncle, so we put a lot of stuff on credit cards, and it was a lot of risks that we assumed, but we were confident in what we were doing. You are like uniquely positioned to talk about both bootstrapping and fundraising, and I have a quote here that I thought was really, really cool. In response to what entrepreneurs do you admire most, you said, people with big visions and bootstrap because they have to, and then slowly draw people into their vision. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I am attracted, see a bunch of questions there, but I'm attracted to people who have a vision basically and are really passionate about it and then go make that happen. There are, on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are companies that just get formed around, that's a good idea and I know the path to raising money and let's do that for 2 years and see what happens. That's just less interesting to me. I like they don't have to bootstrap, but oftentimes people have a vision, are doing something a little crazy, and it's hard for them to raise money right away. And so it's very appealing when someone actually, gets some traction with that.
So DuckDuckGo, how did it all start? Where were you? Do you remember the day when you were like, holy crap, I'm messing around with all this stuff, and this might be a search engine?
So it's very kind of similar to my last business. I had
So mess around, stumble, get lucky, have the right timing, and you could have the next 5 biggest, largest search engine in the world.
So I started a bunch of side projects again out of just interests and hunches, although because of the sale, I had the flexibility to do things without any revenue portion. And I had 2 particular interesting things I was focused on, technical. One is, this was 2007, I was seeing a lot of spam in Google and a lot of just pages that were just obviously spam. Like you click on them and there's little to no content, they're just ads essentially. And they were so obvious that it just seemed it'd be easy to write something to identify them. And so I got onto that just out of a whim. And then, so I messed around with that. And then I also messed around with, again, like the names pages, just putting up other interesting pages that I thought people would attract search traffic. All sorts of structured content based on everything I could get a hold of, Wikipedia, census data, US Postal Service data, all sorts of random data, probably 30 different data sets.
Just scraping everything.
Yeah, just scraping it and processing it. And then thirdly, another side project was something similar to Quora in that I thought, I'd taken this stained glass class and it was like, this lady handed out this sheet of links at the beginning, and they were like, this is the best things to go to on the internet. And it didn't match at all what Google's stained glass listings were. And I was like, well, there's probably millions of people like her who know the best links for these different head terms. This was kind of similar to Mahalo's business model, if anyone remembers them. So I was doing all those three things, as well as like three other things that were nothing to do with search. And kind of just see what would happen with them. And then over time, I realized that those three projects, if you put them together, they maybe could be a compelling search engine. So I thought that would be interesting. Then I worked for 6 months to package them together, and then I kind of soft launched it with no intention of it being a business, just to see what kind of interest there was. And I was pleasantly surprised, so I just continued.
So you sold Classmates, or you sold NamesDatabase, and you had some type of runway. You made a little bit of money, self-funded DuckDuckGo. At what point in time, and I think this would be really, really helpful for a lot of the founders in the room that are going through this process, if you could be as specific as possible, if you feel comfortable. At what point in time did you feel like it was necessary to raise venture? Union Square Ventures is his venture firm, pretty big venture firm. Foursquare, Twitter, it's a good firm. What made you go down that road, and can you give us some economics on what your ideology was?
Yeah, absolutely. How to be as specific as possible is almost everything. I don't have much to hide. It was very obvious. In retrospect, you could have raised money a lot earlier, but I was in this internal debate. Do I want to go big with this or not? I kind of think if you're going to raise money, it's
go big or go home.
Yeah, it's on a different train, especially like a Series A type of thing, which we raised. Like, you have to be in it to go for something really big.
And its point of reference, it was Series A 2011?
End of 2011, yeah.
Okay.
And so, I had done most of all the programming myself for the first 3.5 years. And
wow.
That was, aside from some mobile app stuff, and that was all well and good because it wasn't necessarily obvious what to build for a while before we were kind of taking off. But then at the end of 2010, beginning of 2011, it was very clear that people were switching to DuckDuckGo as their primary search engine. And those people, I talked to everyone I can, wanted certain things. And those things were going to take, I couldn't build them alone in any reasonable amount of time. And so, my wife and I, this is a whole nother conversation that is generally touchy with people, but there's different levels of wealth, obviously. And so we're at a point where we weren't going to put a ton into this because we're kind of risk averse and want to maintain capital. And so
young kids.
Yeah, young kids. We came to a point where we're essentially capitally starving the business because we know if we build these things, it's going to take off more, and we're not going to put in the money. So the natural thing is to go see if you can raise money. So I'd never done it before, so I went out and talked to a bunch of people, and the idea was if we couldn't get terms that we liked or couldn't find investors that we liked, we just weren't going to do it. But if we can...
So there's the economics thing, and then there's also this goals and expectations thing. Are we aligned more than just what the terms are going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. There's the money portion, and then there's the alignment and also value that actually help they can bring. And I haven't worked with a ton of VCs, so I don't know across the board, but the really good VCs are actually very helpful. That's what I know so far.
Let's see here. Let's talk Google and privacy. So this is a hot topic. privacy is a big deal right now. I mean, there's stuff on the Hill down in DC. This is very, very hot. People want to know how much information does Google, Facebook, these other companies know. You made a very, very conscientious and decision to say, not only are we going to have like all these value propositions about, better instant answers, but we're not going to track it. Did you stumble upon that? Was that like, hey, this is how we're going to differentiate, or is this just something that like appeared and you said, hey, this makes sense?
So it was kind of neither, in the sense that it was, I launched this thing at the end of 2008 and hadn't thought about this privacy stuff at all. Search privacy, I've thought about like privacy in general for a long time, like, followed Slashdot and stuff. But I had soft launched it in like Hacker News, Reddit community, and got questions about privacy. Like, what are you doing? Search privacy in particular. What are you doing with your logs? That kind of stuff. I hadn't thought about it at all. I went off and thought about it and decided that two things. One, if you look at search sessions, like even if they're kind of anonymous, but it was all from one person. AOL had this data, this not leak, but they put out some search stuff and everyone de-anonymized it. You can actually tell pretty easily who people are, and there's a lot of personal information in there that is arguably the most personal information on the internet, and it's just kind of creepy. I think people are kind of waking up to that now. This was back in 2009.
Right. So there's been a lot of education around this between 2009 and now.
Exactly. And then the second thing was, there was another trend that I saw of law enforcement had been waking up to winning court cases based on getting personal information from Google, and now it's expanded a lot to all the big ISPs and tech companies. And I've just been personally against the idea of handing over information to governments when I don't have to. And thought, I could cut this all out by just not storing information. And it would just be an easier solution, at least for a while. And so made that not on a whim, but kind of, and because I believed in it. Didn't consider any business repercussions for it, or whether it would be positive or negative. Just kind of did it. And it kind of sat there for a while, for a year and a half before kind of the conversation about privacy started to take off.
Can you tell me a story I read about online and maybe go a little deeper than what they may have talked about? But you create a couple subdomains and create a conversation about privacy, and one day you woke up and the queries were just ridiculous and you were just getting a ton of impressions on the site. Right.
So through 2010, the Wall Street Journal had this series about what do they know, and it was like, it kind of started the privacy media train going. And at the end of 2010, it was pretty obvious that, at least to me, I thought this is going to be a bigger thing. And we were out there doing stuff that they were talking about, but no one knew that we were doing it, because I never really announced it or told anyone or did anything. So I thought that it would be interesting I woke up one morning and thought it would be a cool way to do it would be to have a billboard in San Francisco by Google and say, Google tracks you, we don't. And so that was my initial idea. And I ran it by my wife and my uncle, and they didn't think it was super crazy. So I went down that train. And then I pinged...
Did you say your wife and your uncle?
Yeah.
And you asked your wife because you value her opinion, or?
Absolutely. She was the main sounding board for all NamesDatabase and DuckDuckGo.
That's awesome.
So got to give her a lot of credit.
So wives, spouses out there, pay attention. You can add tremendous value. You might not be able to code, but you can still add a ton of value.
So I pinged my idea was, we put this billboard up, we could use it to get national press because it's kind of cool story, put this in Google backyard, small startup kind of thing. So I pinged some reporters who had I kind of knew over the last 2 years, and one of them said, you should really have a companion site with this. That would make it cool. So I was like, that is a cool idea. And so I quickly wrote that site up. I just did it by hand and spent a night putting it up and put it out there to test the waters. And that thing kind of went viral instantly.
Wow.
I think the whole thing just kind of touches a nerve with people, legitimately. And then the billboard went up 2 weeks later, and then it kind of snowballed from there.
So what's your focus now? Is it growing queries, user base? Are you thinking about fundraising again? What's the state of DuckDuckGo, and what do you think the future looks like 3 years from now?
So we are focused on growing user base, and growing product. I mean, we have this whole long list of product things that we're working on, and we hope that that translates into user base, although we also are about half our time is focused on just growing user base.
Can you give us one or two products that you're working on that's interesting?
Yeah, so we have new mobile apps they're about to launch probably in the next couple weeks.
Wow.
That instant answer platform is also about to relaunch. Those are the two major ones. And then we're working on internal plugins like better images, maps, local, video, news are the big five. That's our roadmap for the rest of the year.
You see any more fundraising on the horizon, or you think you're comfortable where you're at?
We're pretty comfortable. I mean, we raised enough money where the idea was we wouldn't necessarily have to raise again unless we really wanted to. The problem with search engine user acquisition is that for a startup is it's really hard to convert money into users outside of product. There's a history of search engines that have raised 30 to 50 million over the past 7 years and blown it all, acquiring no significant amount of users. And then on the other side, Ask.com, was acquired by Interactive Corp. Then they went out and spent $100 million on advertising campaign. Bing spent godless amounts of money, and it's hard to buy users. So there's not doesn't make a lot of sense to raise a lot of money for user acquisition yet. Maybe there will be at some point.
What about ads?
So ads, to buy ads?
Well, one thing I like about DuckDuckGo is it's clean, right? There's not like a million ads and just a cluttered environment. That's one of the things I don't necessarily like about Google. I always balance whether I'm doing an organic search or whether I'm looking at paid search, and if they kind of jive, do they balance out?
So they have a lot of ads, and they've been increasing their ads over time. See, Google and Facebook has the same problem. It's a well-known problem, but as people have shifted to mobile monetizes a lot less. The cost per click on mobile is down. You can't show as many ads. So what do? You up the ads on the desktop, and you charge more. And so that's what they've been doing. And if you look at their site on high-value keywords from 2007, 8, 9, as you go, you just see more and more ads. It's kind of ridiculous. At the same time, those ads are super lucrative. I mean, Google makes insane amount of money on them. So as a startup, we feel that it's a better user experience to have less ads, and that's a sustainable business model for us. So we have no plans to add a lot more advertising.
Good. So you're an active blogger. I mentioned, if you haven't checked out Gabe's blog, it's an awesome blog. One of your blog posts I read back in March was about customer development and traction. You recently co-authored a book around traction.
I'm still working on it.
Still working on it. Can you talk a little bit about what traction means to you by way of customer development, lean methodology, lean startups? This is a real hot conversation in the startup world.
Yeah, so traction means to me real customer engagement, which means customers are truly engaged with your product. And that means something different across different products, right? For here, you have people wanting to have the space, right? For consumer search engine, for me, it's people want to switch to it as their primary search engine. And then once you have that engagement, the question becomes, how do you get more of that engagement? And so that's what the book is kind of focused on. And what I did was I did a bunch of interviews like this. Back in 2010, I started doing them with people I could reach who had done a lot of successful stuff, and I asked them to really dig deep into what made it successful, like when it really took off. And what I'd uncovered was they used about 20 different what we call traction channels to do so. So obvious ones that people always know, SEO, AdWords on Google, sales. But then there's all these other ones that are kind of edge cases, but they're not really edge cases because people are successful with them, like trade shows, affiliate marketing, just business development. And generally, when a startup took off, they were focusing on just one of these. One of these made it take off. And from talking to founders, people look at these channels in a very ad hoc way. They're like, oh, I know about AdWords. I'm going to try that now and try some social media. I'm not going to think about trade shows ever because they've never been to one or something, But the trade show maybe for your business may have been the thing that you should have done first, you know? And so I was trying to come up with a framework of how to think about these channels and how to get to the one that works for you fastest. And the basic methodology is you got to cut out your bias. You got to look at all 20 as potential targets, do some serious research and brainstorming around them, and then try to winnow down on the few that maybe have the best case for working now, test them in parallel. If one starts to work, double down on that. If not, kind of repeat. And you know, I think it's a good strategy.
So I mentioned earlier, Gabe is obviously an active angel investor, and he's an active angel investor in Philadelphia companies, which I admire. To name a few: Ticket Leap, Wise Hive, RJ Metrics, Perceptual Networks, Note Hall, which exited to Chegg. Why do you feel compelled to be an angel investor, and what's your basic mindset around angel investing?
So it's changed a lot. I mean, I was always just interested in learning more, getting closer to other startups because I was isolated in my startup. And
so very much a learning experience as well.
Absolutely, very much learning experience. But I had no knowledge about it. I didn't really research it much. And then 2009 was my first angel investment in Note Hall.
You're just out there writing checks.
I was a Dreamit mentor, and I saw them, and a lot of stuff they were doing was viral stuff, and I was very knowledgeable about viral stuff. And I was like, I can help you guys. Why don't I invest? And I didn't know what I was doing. I got hooked up with Steve Welch and his friend, and so we put together the round. That was my first foray into it. After that, I started researching it a bit more and decided that, I learned the basic tenets of angel investing, which you have to be willing to lose all your money. So set aside a portion you really don't care about losing. You want to. I get into these details deeply if you want, but basic ones are set aside money. You got to do a bunch of angel investments because a lot of things fail, and you got to do them across a bunch of years because it turns out some years are just way more successful as startups than other years.
But it's interesting to hear the Dreamit Ventures model. For those of you that don't know, Dreamit Ventures is an accelerator. They're based here out of Philadelphia. They're also in other cities, I believe, Austin. John from Qualia, who's a member here, they're a Dreamit Ventures grad, and we have a couple others. So that was like a point of reference for you in terms of what you wanted to do by way of small investments in certain companies across a variety of industries?
Right. So the money we set aside was not that large, so we were making kind of small investments. My initial thesis after getting into it was, you could see that all these incubators were out there and that there were going to be a lot of Series A financing risk, or they call it the Series A crunch now.
Yeah.
And I saw that coming down the pike and thought that at the same point, there's a lot of big companies. Software, they have that quote, software's eating the world, Mark Andreessen says, which I think is true. And so you're going to see all of these Fortune 500, 2,000 companies being disrupted by software. And they're not just going to sit around and be disrupted. They're going to go out and buy startups eventually because they're not going to be able to do this in-house. So my thesis was, after a few years, what you're starting to see now, you're going to see a lot more $30, $50 million acquisitions based on companies that have just raised like smaller amounts of funding, didn't go out to venture. And so I thought I would try to find kind of those opportunities that if all was well, they didn't need more financing. There was less financing risk.
Gotcha.
And then other than that, I saw, the clear path to them doing well, that kind of stuff. I like the founders, all that kind of normal stuff. I've since evolved away from that a bit. And after being involved closely with a lot of companies and spent a lot of my time on it, I've become just more aware of what I'm personally interested in, and all my experience has been consumer, so there's less of that in Philly, I realize, but that's what excites me more. So I'm more looking for transformative consumer stuff, although I'm willing to entertain other things.
And being a solo founder, you're not prejudiced necessarily to a small team or a single entrepreneur.
Absolutely not prejudiced, yeah. I think that is a lot of BS.
You heard it here first. One of the things you list on your blog, and I really, really like it, you have like 5 of your best startup ideas, is choose an ambitious idea. So what drives you?
So I think you should choose an ambitious idea for a number of reasons, and you could read that post. I'm not going to do it complete justice, but the basic tenet is it's just as easy to do an ambitious idea than it is to do a non-ambitious idea, even though people think that, oh, I'm going to choose this niche, it's going to be super easy. But when you choose an ambitious idea, it's so much easier to attract investment, employees, press, because everyone is excited about this ambitious idea. And I've seen that up close with the search engine. I mean, everyone's excited about disrupting huge markets, and it's so much easier to get attention for it. And when you're in a niche, no one really cares what you're doing. And even when you are super successful, the numbers kind of cap out. And if you're going to put in all that effort and it's about just as easy, you might as well do something that has more impact.
Right.
So that's my reason for doing ambitious ideas.
So B2C aside, and ambitious ideas, you probably see a tremendous amount of deal flow. Gabe also is one of the people that leads up Open Angel Forum here in Philadelphia. I encourage you to apply. How many people do we get to apply for Open Angel Forum? Not as much as you would like, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think it's like 70 to 90 applications each time.
We should have more here in Philadelphia, I think. But what do you look for in a founder specifically? Like idea side, B2C, industry, something you can relate to? What do you look for in the core of a founder?
So I've evolved in that a bit too. So
Where were you and where you are now?
I was, looking for, hacker founders who were kind of frugal, who weren't going to run out of money quickly, and who otherwise could take, were willing to kind of take mentorship, direction a bit. Now I'm really focused on someone passionate about what they're doing. I mean, I've seen up close a few times from my investments, like, and I don't begrudge people for this at all, because I did the same thing, of taking an early exit. And I've also seen people just, when things get tough, just quitting. And I don't begrudge them on that either, because it was tough. But it's because they didn't really care about what they were doing. On the other side of that, if you are successful, the median time to exit is really long. It's like 8 years for generally angel-backed startups on average, so it could be a lot longer. And venture-backed stuff is even longer if you actually look at the data. And so I think you have to be committed to working on something for a decade if you're going to start something.
Wow. Patience, perseverance.
Yeah, and for that to work, the only way that works is if you're super excited about what you're doing. And so that's what I've been looking for.
We touched on in the beginning of the conversation, mentorship, and it was literally the same month on PSL, you came out with mentor chats as I was looking to bring Startup Grind to Philadelphia. And by no means is this a vehicle.
If you do it better, I will stop doing it.
No, not at all. I think Mentor Chats is great. This isn't necessarily a vehicle for mentorship. I hope that people find mentors here. I mean, you got guys like Mike Krupit, who's in the room, a startup veteran. Marvin Weinberger from the Infonautics days. If you guys don't know who Marvin Weinberger is from Infonautics, he's the founder. Josh Koppelman was his co-founder. So these are the quality people that I think that are coming to the event. So I think mentorship is something that's important. And Gabe hit it on the head. He saw something lacking in our ecosystem here, and he said, I'm going to launch Mentor Chats. Picked a great guy with Mike Krupit, startup veteran. Talk about why you picked Mike and just why you thought Mentor Chats was something important to you.
So I am attracted to this problem about how to make Philly the next startup hub, or at least...
I love it.
I think it's a hard problem. I think it's interesting. And the way I think of it interesting is like this. As you know from because you're involved with Startup America, Startup PA, almost every city is starting to have startup ecosystem happen because that's the natural flow of what's happening with tech startups. It's just easier to start a company. Outside money is realized they're going to invest in different cities. So you're going to see all sorts of cities have somewhat vibrant startup ecosystems, and we have, I think, a vibrant one now. That said. There's going to be some cities that go way faster than other cities. And there's going to be a reason for that. And so I'm focused on figuring out what that reason would be and what we can do in Philly to make 2020 Philly what would otherwise be 2030 Philly, if we press the right levers.
Right. And mentorship's a huge part of that.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is this. I mean, and Mike has his own thoughts on it, and I think I've been trying to talk to many people, so I'm not saying this is the right way. I'm totally willing to change my mind. But one way that I look at it is, okay, what is success in Philly, right? So we have some good startups now that have taken off in the last few years. I put like Monetate front and center, right? NextDocs, I see Sawick in the room. They're up there, and there's a host of others I've listed on my Found in Philly site.
Foundedinphilly.com. You want to find out information on startups that have raised money, have exited, that have jobs available. Really, really simple. Gabe put it in a clean fashion, all on one page. You don't have to do a lot of searching in typical DuckDuckGo fashion.
So my view of success is you have like, say you have in a few years from now, you have 15 more Monetates in Philly. That would be very successful. We have a lot of resources in Philly already, because we're like the 5th biggest city.
Who knows Monetate? Raise your hand if you know who Monetate is.
Good. We have a lot of tech talent. We have a lot of people coming out of school. They would gladly work at these companies. So I don't think we're getting almost all the Series A money that has come into Philly in the past 18 months has been outside Philly money.
RJ Metrics?
Yeah, RJ Metrics, us, I think NextDocs, Zonoff, Curelate. First round was in it, but it was led by NEA.
Right.
So VCs will invest here. I mean, that's not a problem. So I don't think you have a scale problem in Philly. You have a problem of starting these companies. And fundamentally, it doesn't take that many people to start these companies. You need a few founders in each, or possibly one, right? And so I think the problem is more when I was starting NamesDatabase, right? There's people like me here starting a company like that, and they're bootstrapping along and not thinking big enough. They're not thinking that how to make this bigger. Oh, I could make this bigger. And there are probably 20 of those people out there right now doing that right now. If those people were hooked up with some of the people you mentioned, and these other 30 plus mentors I've met in the past, few years doing Open Angel Forum, and they were paired with the right people, whether they invest or not, but they became excited in the same space, I think that might be a pressure point to move things faster.
Right. So we had Wayne Kimmel here last month, and he was super stoked about Philadelphia. We talked about the brain drain, and we have a ton of universities in this area, specifically, one of the best universities in the world by way of Wharton, grad school, undergrad. How do we capture the talent, keep them here? How do we activate them? How do we matchmake them with mentors? Like, that sounds great, right? But how do we matchmake them with mentors? How do we find who Gabe Weinberg should mentor next?
Right. So I don't think the brain drain problem doesn't worry me that much, because I think if these companies exist, if there were 15 Monetates right now, we'd be a much more attractive place to stay after school. And I think we've been increasingly more attractive over time. Those brain drain statistics have been in our favor for the past 15 years, as Philadelphia has kind of been a nicer place to live. So I'm not worried about that aspect. I am worried about the mentor part. And I kind of think you need someone at the center, not necessarily at the center. It could be more fluid, like with tech tools or something, but you need some kind of orchestration of this happening, because I meet these people, they come to Open Angel Forum, I meet the mentors all the time. They want to get involved. They have no idea how to find the right startup. And so it's got to be people like you who see people coming in, PSL and other places have to make these connections. It's not happening to the degree I'd like it. I honestly, if I wasn't running DuckDuckGo, I'd probably focus on it, but I don't have time to be that person.
What's a single piece of advice do you have for a tech founder that might be in the audience that's kind of struggling with where they're at by way of their stage? They're early on, they're bootstrapping, they have a good product, they may have customers. You talk about perseverance and patience. What other advice do you have for them?
I don't have any blanket advice. I mean, I definitely think this getting a mentor thing is real. Like, you should go, if you're struggling with a particular problem, you should go find someone who's kind of been there, done that. Even if it's not a long-term mentor kind of thing. It was just advice. Or one thing I always, actually this is probably the best advice, is go talk to people who failed at what you're doing and who are no longer doing it. There always are those people. So you started a startup, you look at the history of your space. I'm so surprised how many people I talk to, founders who have no idea the history of their own space. And there's some nice naivete to that, in the sense that like, oh, you're going to do it differently, and there's some truth to that. But like when you get down to making it work, and now you're into it already, you've kind of established what you're doing, you have some problems, then I'd go talk to all these people who failed, because you'll uncover all sorts of interesting things that you could try.
Well, that concludes my portion. A quick round of applause for Gabe Weinberg. Gabe, thanks so much. I really can't thank you enough. I admire your product, your perseverance, your track record. You've given back to the city. You're a true community builder. Gabe Weinberg, everybody.
Thanks.
So Gabe's going to stick around for about 20 minutes. He has a long hike back to Valley Forge, so feel free to grab some drinks and hang out for a bit. But I was remiss last time, and I have a couple call to actions for the end of each event. I'm going to try to do that going forward. My first call to action is try DuckDuckGo out for a week. All right? I think you'll find that it's really, really sticky, and that might be your primary search engine going forward. So I challenge each and every one of you, use DuckDuckGo every time you think, oh, let me go Google or Bing this. Use DuckDuckGo.
We still love feedback at individual level. So if anyone actually does that and they're like, okay, I tried it, these queries are terrible, these ones are good, that is actually valuable. So if you actually record that information, you can email it directly to me. It's yegg@duckduckgo.com, and I would be grateful for it.
And call to action number 2 is be a doer here in Philadelphia. Join a community. There's a ton of awesome communities here in Philadelphia. Benjamin's Jest is just one of them. And we think this is pretty interesting what we're doing here at BD and Startup Grind. And this is much bigger than startups. It's much bigger than entrepreneurship. This is bigger than you or I. We're trying to convene a conversation about how to make Philadelphia a great place. And it's about having events like Startup Grind that we may maybe possibly inspire the next billion-dollar company founder, having heard Gabe Weinberg. So I really challenge you to get out there and be a doer. At the end of the day, just be a doer. Go do something. Join a community. So that's all I have. Again, one more round of applause for Gabe, and have a good night.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.